Hello and welcome to the Wild Embossing Powder channel. I am Sasha here with Card Maker's Delight. So today I'll be showing you two ways to use your embossing powders. One is a bit more advanced than the other, but you do get different results depending on how much work you're willing to put in, I guess. Okay, so we'll start off with the more advanced technique, and of course I will be using my Wow Superior cardstock and also this Crafty Meraki cover plate die. So this die is a cover plate and it measures 6.5 by 3.5, which is the perfect size for a mini slimline card. So that's what we'll be creating today. So I'm going to go ahead and cut out my little die cut, but when I'm removing it I'm going to be ever so careful so that I don't leave any pieces of that on my magnetic plate. And then I'm going to take a piece of press and seal and press it onto the back of that so that I'm able to keep it as one piece. I'm going to go ahead and use my little pokey tool to poke out the bits so that I am able to separate it from the plate, and what you're left with is the bits stay intact. Well, mostly they stay intact. Mostly some of them do come out of place, but it's so easy to just pop them back into place. This is a much easier way to do it, I promise you. So I'm just going to pop out the spaces there because we're not going to need those, and once I'm done with that I'm going to go ahead and pull up this outline bit so that we're left with the, what do you call it, the inlay bits, the infill bits, I don't know what you call it, but those bits there, that's what we want for this first card. So I'm going to go ahead and take another piece of press and seal and lay that over the top. So this would be the front of that panel, and then I'm going to flip that over. So we've created a little press and seal sandwich, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the back layer. So the reason why I did that is so that we keep that whole panel intact, because we're going to need that panel intact, and if you had to reorganize it every time you wouldn't want to do this method, so just get you some press and seal. So I'm going ahead and adding some glue. This part was tiresome, I'm not going to lie. Okay, so if there's a way that you can do this type of method, like using the press and seal but using maybe double-sided adhesive sheets, then I would probably do that, because adding the glue did take quite a while. So anyway, once I've glued that down, I'm going to go ahead and peel off my press and seal, and you can see that you do get a few strays, but most of it stays stuck down, which is really good. And the relief, like when you're pulling that off and you see that it is stuck down, you're like, oh my god, thank goodness I don't have to be here paper piecing. What would we do without press and seal? So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do my little repairs, stick back whatever is sticking up, and just check if there are any more that are sticking up. Then I'll trim that so that we have that mini slimline size. So this is our panel. Now we're going to go ahead and reserve this one. Now with this one you can use it as it is, but I like to double it up, because once you add two of them together they are a bit more sturdy. So I'll just show you the difference here. That's one layer and that's two layers. You can see that the one layer is so flimsy, but anyway, that's for our second card. So let's go ahead and decorate our panel. I'll be using some distress oxides. So yes, of course we're going to be ink blending, and I'll also be using these tiny little brushes. Aren't they so cute? So anyway, I'm starting off with some spiced marmalade. I'm thinking about pumpkins. Spiced marmalade, and I'm just going in the centers there. Then I'll follow that up with some seedless preserves. So the way I decided to do this is that I will do two flowers at a time and do them exactly the same. So after I added my seedless preserves, I went in with the final layer of wilted violet right over the top of that. So now we're going to go ahead and do these two flowers, and I'm starting with some shaded lilac right in the middle of that, and I will follow that up with some seedless preserve, just a light layer of seedless preserves around the exterior, and then I will add some spiced marmalade, and then as you can see, I'm not going towards the edges, I'm leaving some white spaces to which I will add some shaded lilac. Now the blending doesn't have to be perfect at all, so don't worry if you're like not getting this part. You can just blend however you want to blend. You can even use completely different colors if you wanted to. So for that last flower, I'm going to go in with some shaded lilac, like a really nice thick layer of shaded lilac, and just cover up most of that flower. So right about now, you're going to see me do a mistake, which is to dip my shaded lilac brush into my wilted violet. Don't you just hate when that happens? That happens way too often. Comment below if you can relate to that, because I do it so many times. So anyway, once I've added my shaded lilac, I don't want to forget that little guy there. There's like a little one popping through there, so don't forget him. I'm going to add a wilted violet over the top of that and just blend those two colors together. Now you can leave it like this if you wanted to, but I like texture, so and I'm going to go ahead and just use my brush to splatter some water over the top of that, just to get those inks moving. And I think this really helps if your ink blending is not that great. It really like just gets it looking a bit different. So make sure you have completely dried your panel before moving on to the next step, because you can actually heat emboss with water, so you don't want any water on your panel. So in honor of Her Majesty, our amazing queen, we will be using royal purple embossing powder. May she rest in perfect peace. You will also need your Wow Embossing Mixed Media brush and your Wow Embossing pen. So you need to cover up the areas where you don't want any embossing ink, because this can get really messy. So just use a scrap piece of paper just to cover up those areas. And when you dip your brush into the embossing ink, you can see that it comes out like a lot, so you need to like wipe it on the edges so that you don't get too much on there. You're just going to brush a blob, like a blob, I don't know how to describe it, a blob of it onto your panel to cover the wide spaces. And then for the nooks and crannies, you're going to take your pen and just push the embossing ink into those nooks and crannies. There's no way that I can explain this in a way that it makes sense to you, because it makes sense in my head, but to you, you're probably like, what is she saying? But anyway, you'll see as I'm doing it what I mean. Keep a brush nearby so that you can remove any embossing powder that has gone astray, because you don't want to cover up your beautiful ink blended flowers with embossing powder. No, we don't want to do that. So recently there's been this technique that a few card makers have been doing, where they stencil and then they fill in like the gaps with a black marker. So whilst I was watching that, I thought to myself, wait, what if you tried that with embossing powders? I wonder how that would look. And trust me, it is so worth trying with embossing powders. I will show you why later on once we're done with this part, but once you see why, you'll be like, oh wow, I've got to try that. It is so worth the effort, I promise you, because it is so stunning, especially in real life. After one layer of powder, this is how your panel looks. You can leave it like this, but I really wanted a super dramatic look, so I'm gonna go ahead and do a second layer of that powder. This time around you don't need as much of that embossing ink, because you already have a bottom layer of embossing powder for the top layer of embossing powder to stick to. So just go ahead and add your embossing powders, and then once you're done with that, you can see. Now I did say earlier, I'll tell you why you need to try this, and this is why. Just look at that gloss. Like seriously, think of this if it was like water lily card and those lilies were like floating on one of Marion's turquoise or teal embossing powders. Like seriously, just look at how beautiful that is. The gloss alone just oh. So anyway, you could leave it the way it is, but I can't because I am me. So I'm going to go ahead and just take a regular purple colored pen and just do an outline to tidy up the card. So essentially all that we're doing is just drawing a line on the ridges of the floral die cut. So wherever there's like a ridge or an edge, you just draw a line, and how thick it is depends on how much embossing powder was overlapping. So that's how I decided how thick my outline lines were. To make this pass along quickly, I do like to listen to music. This took me about 2 songs long. Now I listen to K-pop whilst I'm crafting, so there were a few dance breaks, but it still only took just 2 songs long to get this whole panel outlined. Please comment below what you listen to whilst you're crafting, whether it's music or maybe you listen to other craft videos, and in that case you can always play one of our Wow Embossing Powder channel playlists whilst you craft. So anyway, this is how it looked like after I added the outline. Now I know I wanted to add some white splatters, but I didn't want to use acrylic paint, so I grabbed my holy grail, which is my chunky white embossing powder. This is the ultra high gloss stuff. I love this stuff so much, okay? Like, I literally finished 2 jars of this stuff in like 2 months because I use it so much. But anyway, I'm just going to heat up a small area and then just pop a few of those little chunks and then just slightly heat them so that they create like this splattery look. But of course you can always splatter if that's what you prefer, and you will definitely get a different look. But this is how this one looks, so you can see how that beautiful gloss is just popping behind those matte flowers. I just so love this look, guys. And to turn it into a card, I added it to a card base that is slightly wider so that I could leave that white border. So give about a ½ centimeter allowance to your card base. And then I also added a sentiment there from Pink Fresh Studios, and I added some pearls from Lucy's shop because I can't not do bling. I mean, it's not even complete without any bling, so we went for some subtle pearls, you know. Okay, so onto the simpler card. Well, it was simple until I messed it up, but anyway, you already saw that I had doubled up that panel there by sticking 2 of the die cuts together. Then now I'm just inking it up. You can use whatever method of inking up works for you. I like squishing it into the ink pad, but I'm only doing half at a time, because unless you can work really fast and get that whole panel embossed before the ink dries out, then I would suggest you do just half at a time. So I am adding some spice latte to the middle of my flower there, which is a new embossing powder from the Coffee Time with Catherine Pooler. I love that orange, and over that I'm going to add my purple. Now I do realize like this is giving Halloween vibes, but what I wanted to do is show you that you can use a Halloween color palette for your floral cards. You don't just have to reserve it for your Halloween cards. So this is how it looks like after 1 layer of embossing. You can see it's like light and nice and pretty, but I wanted a really dark look, so I'm going to go ahead and repeat my steps so that I can add a 2nd layer of embossing powder, and this is what it looks like. You can see that the purple is like deeper and the orange is like a bit more vibrant. I also went ahead and ink blended my panel so that this video isn't extra long. I did it exactly the same way as the card before. So what I did is I took one of the panels, one of the die cuts, the outline, and I stuck it on some card, and then I went ahead and ink blended in between the spaces, the gaps that were left there. And like I said before, I did it exactly like how I did the other card. So if you want to know how to ink blend this panel, just watch the ink blending part for this card. And once that was done, I went ahead and just stuck my panel over the top. At this point, I sort of had an idea that I wanted to like emboss in between those gaps, but I wasn't sure, so I went ahead and did the step that I was sure of, which is to stick some of these black gems onto my center, like the middle part of my flowers. But this was the mistake, because I should have embossed first. So when you're doing this, make sure that you emboss first. So I went ahead and embossed so that I could show you how it looks, but it was really hard doing it once I had added my cover plate. So what you need to do is, before you do the step where you stick that embossed plate onto the top, you're going to go ahead and do this step, which is to emboss in between those gaps. So I'm just going to quickly show you what I ended up doing, but you won't have to do this, but you just have to add your embossing ink to the empty gaps and then go ahead and add embossing powder and heat emboss that. But I had to like do all these other extra steps, like removing the embossing powder from the gaps and doing it like one hole at a time so that I don't get my embossing powder everywhere. Like just don't do it this way, okay? Do your embossing first and then add the cover plate and then add your gems on top. That's the right order. But anyway, I persevered and I managed to finish the card. But once I'd done my first layer, I then realized that I think it would be cool to do like a stained glass look. So I went and just added more embossing powder to some of the gaps, and I left the other gaps just with one layer of embossing powder so that you could get that variation in color. I don't know if it's like that visible in the through the camera, but in real life it's like so visible and it's so cool. It looks like stained glass, and I think this is such a nice way to add a different look to your embossing. So I turned that into a card by adding a simple little statement, because I didn't want to cover up any of that gorgeous stained glass look. So I just added a tiny little sentiment that says you are essential, because all our friends are. So I was really having a blast with this embossing session, so I went ahead and made 2 more cards just to further show you that you can do the same technique, embossing technique, but then depending on the work that you put in, you can get completely different looks. So for this card here, I just took the cover die and I embossed it with the Spice Latte and the Royal Purple, just like in the card before, and then I stuck that on some white card, then used the die cuts to do some inlay, but I did a floating inlay. Well, that's what I like to call it. I just add glue just to the bottom tip of my inlay piece, and rather than sticking the whole piece down, I only stick the bit with the glue and then I let the other bit like sit up. So I raise it up so that it looks like it's floating. I don't know, that's what it looks like to me. For this card over here, I created a background just like we did in the first card, but the difference with this one is that once I created the background, I went ahead and added a white cover die over that. So the white outline bit of the die, I added that to this, and that gives it a really different look, don't you think? I feel like this looks so much softer, but then you can still see some of that deep purple there, and it's giving like sort of like an offset look. So that's another way to like stretch your supplies or create different looks with your embossing powders. So thank you so much for watching this video till the end. I know it is like longer than usual, but I just really wanted to share this with you guys just to encourage you to use your embossing powders, because there's so many different things that you can create, or different looks that you can create with your embossing powders. And once you do create those looks, don't forget to tag us on our socials, because you could find yourself on the Wow Embossing Powder page or even on the Wow Embossing Powder blog.